There will be no other day like tomorrow.
There is no bigger alien fanatic we know of than Steven Spielberg. The man has been fascinated with the unknown throughout his life, and that has helped him weave multiple characters across multiple storylines that often take us on an adrenaline-fueled adventure. If you ask me, Disclosure Day has all the hallmarks you would expect from a classic Spielberg film, because once again we see the director tackle the concept of extraterrestrial life in the same vein as Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The film has a shit ton of intense emotions as the protagonists grapple with their place in the universe and ask the bigger questions, like how the existence of extraterrestrial beings would impact the very concept of faith and religion on a global scale. I understand that the open to interpretation ending pissed off a lot of you, but I honestly believe that Disclosure Day seems more rewarding with every rewatch, especially because it helps you understand why Spielberg wanted to end his summation film on such a mysterious note. The film has packed in a lot of grand ideas into an action-adventure type of plot, so unless you are really putting your thinking hat on, there are plenty of details neatly scattered throughout Disclosure Day that you may have missed out on. But that's why we are here, so without wasting another moment, let's discuss every Easter egg, burning question, and behind-the-scenes fact we know about Disclosure Day. The idea of Disclosure Day first came to Spielberg almost 9 years ago. So, Steven Spielberg's fascination with outer space began when he was just a young child. Apparently, when he was barely 6 years old, his father woke him in the middle of the night and drove him to a quiet field near their home in New Jersey to watch a spectacular meteor shower streak across the sky. That was the experience which left a lasting impression on him and pretty much cultivated his desire to tell stories about worlds beyond our own. That early inspiration eventually led to Firelight, which was a low-budget alien invasion film Spielberg made in 1964 when he was only 17 years old, using just $500. Years later, he returned to those same themes on a much larger scale, with Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977 and E.T. the Extraterrestrial in 1982. Rather than portraying aliens as frightening monsters, his films have presented them as complex, emotional beings who are simply seeking understanding and connection. That perspective is one of the driving forces behind Disclosure Day. According to the director, the seed for Disclosure Day was apparently planted in 2017 after he read a New York Times report that outlined new details about a top-secret Pentagon UFO program. Moreover, during the same year, the interest in extraterrestrials reached a new fever pitch after Barack Obama went on a podcast and claimed that they were real, but he has never seen them. In fact, even Trump had promised to release all the files they have on alien life at one point. In fact, just this month, the chair of the International Academy of Astronautics Committee for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence suggested that the discovery of alien life was a matter of when and not if. While he admitted he could not predict whether it would happen this year, next year, in the coming decades, or even centuries from now, he was oddly confident that someone would eventually find evidence of extraterrestrial life. I think that perspective lends an eerily prescient quality to Disclosure Day, which cleverly imagines how news of alien life might ripple across the globe as people everywhere glued to their phones silently absorb this reality-changing revelation. The movie foreshadowed its ending with the mention of St. Clair. As you know, Daniel first crosses paths with the Wardex agents while trying to rescue his girlfriend Jane. Later, after they make a run for their lives, Jane takes him to the monastery of St. Clair of the Dawn, which turned out to be quite an important place for her, as she had once dreamed of becoming a nun before ultimately leaving that path behind after losing her faith in humanity. Now, this reference to the name St. Clair was not exactly random because apart from being known as the patron saint of good weather, laundry, and eye diseases, she is also the patron saint of television, which is a detail that subtly foreshadows the film's ending. Although St. Clair was born in the 12th century, she was actually given this designation in 1957 by Pope Pius XII. The title was apparently inspired by a strange miracle because while St. Clair was sick and confined to her bed, she apparently witnessed an entire mass service projected onto the wall of her room. Communication and television in particular plays an important role in Disclosure Day, because when they finally disclose the news of pre-existing alien presence on Earth for decades, Daniel takes over a live news broadcast to reveal authentic footage of extraterrestrial life that the government has kept hidden from the world for 79 years. Because of the global reach of television signals, the message spread almost instantly, as it allowed people around the world to witness the revelation together. This idea aligns with Pope Pius XII's beliefs, who described television as a powerful tool capable of both great good and great harm. That observation feels just as relevant today, in the age of the internet, because it is true modern media has often deepened divisions and fueled misinformation, but it has also connected people across borders and cultures in unprecedented ways. Disclosure Day deliberately chooses to lean into that more hopeful possibility. Amid all the noise, confusion, and competing narratives, the film suggests that moments of genuine truth still have the power to break through and unite people around a shared reality. The Nixon story within the film is actually based on real-life events. So at one point in Disclosure Day, Daniel goes through some of the secret alien footage he managed to obtain from Wardex in order to show the evidence of extraterrestrial life to Jane. In one particularly intriguing clip, we see the former US President Richard Nixon seemingly giving a tour of what looks like an alien morgue, and Daniel identifies the man accompanying Nixon as a famous actor from the 1970s. Now, you have to be very eagle-eyed or a true UFO enthusiast in order to recognize the actor as Jackie Gleason, the beloved star of the classic sitcom The Honeymooner. This scene is apparently inspired from a long-standing UFO legend. According to Gleason's second wife, Beverly McKittrick, the actor was deeply fascinated by UFOs and was friends with Nixon through their shared love of golf. The story claims that Nixon was aware of Gleason's interest in extraterrestrial life and once took him to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida, where he showed him the preserved bodies of several aliens. But then the main question is, did this incident actually happen? Well, there is no definitive evidence to support it. The story originates solely from Jackie Gleason's second wife, Beverly McKittrick, making it a second-hand account rather than a first-hand testimony. Still, it is rather fun to think about, because maybe Nixon was simply pulling a prank on his friend by showing him elaborate alien props or dummies to play on his fascination with extraterrestrials. However, later in Disclosure Day, it is suggested that incidents like this are the reason why US presidents are no longer fully briefed on UFO-related matters. Since presidents eventually return to private life after their term is over, they could potentially reveal sensitive information after leaving office. As for the Gleason-Nixon tale itself, it definitely remains an intriguing urban legend that continues to spark our curiosity even decades later. Every extraterrestrial road leads back to Roswell. While the Jackie Gleason UFO story may be familiar only to dedicated conspiracy theory enthusiasts, the Roswell incident is one of the most famous alien stories ever told. Throughout Disclosure Day, several characters mention that evidence of extraterrestrial life has been concealed for 79 years, which I think is a remarkably specific number. If the film is set in 2026, that timeline points directly to 1947, which was the year of the infamous Roswell incident. The real-life event began in June 1947 when a pilot reported seeing a group of unusual crescent-shaped objects moving across the sky. And not long afterward, mysterious debris was discovered scattered across a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Now, there was no immediate explanation available for these freak incidents, so newspapers seized on the story by popularizing the term flying saucers and fueling widespread speculation among the masses about alien visitors. The US government later investigated the incident and stated that the debris came from a weather balloon. However, the explanation did very little to quell public curiosity, and that is how Roswell has remained at the center of UFO lore ever since. However, you should know that not everyone accepted the government's explanation. In the decades that followed, countless theories have emerged, suggesting that the Roswell incident involved the crash of an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and that officials covered up the truth by replacing the wreckage with debris from a weather balloon. For many believers, Roswell marked the moment when the government first learned of alien life, and began keeping that knowledge hidden from the public. Whether it is fact or folklore, the mystery has surely endured for generations. Roswell itself has embraced its reputation by becoming a major destination for UFO enthusiasts from around the world. Today, the city is unabashedly synonymous with alien lore, thus earning its status as the unofficial UFO capital of the world. The aliens from Disclosure Day are tailored after the aliens we had seen in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. As you know, aliens have appeared in countless forms throughout popular culture, from the diverse species of Star Wars to the terrifying creatures of Alien and the mysterious visitors in Arrival. Filmmakers have imagined extraterrestrial life in all kinds of ways. But through it all, one of the most constant iterations has been the Greys. Characterized by gray skin, oversized heads, slender bodies, and large black eyes, the Grey has become the classic image of an alien in the public imagination, and Disclosure Day embraces this familiar design by giving its extraterrestrials the same simple but iconic appearance. The choice also creates a clear connection to Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The aliens featured in the 1977 film's famous finale are small beings with large heads and distinctly non-human proportions. While the creatures in Disclosure Day have their own look, they share many of the traits that have come to define the Grey archetype. Although the origins of the Grey alien stretch back much further, the image gained widespread attention following the famous Barney and Betty Hill abduction story in 1961. The couple claimed they had been taken aboard a spacecraft by gray-skinned humanoid beings, thus helping cement the visual template that would dominate UFO culture for decades to come. Similar designs also appeared in famous science fiction television, including the memorable 1964's The Outer Limits episode, The Bellerose Shield. Over time, the Grey became the definitive alien image in movies, television, and conspiracy lore. Spielberg has returned to versions of this design throughout his career, and Disclosure Day continues on that tradition. After all, when an image has become so deeply embedded in our collective imagination, there may be very little reason to reinvent it. Spielberg has also referenced another underrated Alien miniseries. While the similarities between Disclosure Day and Close Encounters of the Third Kind are easy to spot, the film also contains a lesser-known Spielberg connection which only fans of the 2002 miniseries called Taken may recognize. Despite sharing a title with the Liam Neeson action franchise, Taken was actually a science fiction miniseries produced by Spielberg. It spans across several decades and follows three interconnected families whose lives are shaped by extraterrestrial encounters, beginning with the Roswell incident. But the connection goes beyond the Roswell backdrop because in Taken, aliens often disguise themselves as friendly, inviting creatures to gain the trust of children. In one memorable scene, a smiling squirrel guides a child toward a tree glowing from within. The aliens also adopt these harmless forms as a way of luring children for their own mysterious purposes. Now, a similar idea appears on Disclosure Day. During the film's climax, Margaret and Daniel are forced to revisit moments from their childhoods. In one sequence, a young Margaret, played by Delaney Cuthbert, is drawn toward a brightly illuminated house that looks like the one from Hansel and Gretel. We see that a group of friendly-looking animals leads her inside, which creates a sense of comfort and familiarity. The implication is that the aliens deliberately crafted the experience to make the child feel safe, thus echoing the same themes explored in Taken more than 2 decades earlier. Snow White represents the loss of innocence within the film, so the connection between Taken and Disclosure Day goes beyond their shared references to the Roswell incident. In Spielberg's miniseries, aliens often disguise themselves as friendly-looking animals to make themselves seem less threatening. In one memorable scene, a cheerful squirrel leads a child toward a mysterious tree glowing from within, and it is soon revealed that the aliens adopt these comforting forms to gain children's trust before carrying out their experiments. Disclosure Day employs a remarkably similar idea because during the film's climactic moments, Margaret and Daniel are forced to revisit memories from their childhood. In one sequence, a young Margaret is guided by a group of animals toward a glowing house that resembles something straight out of Hansel and Gretel. The scene suggests that the aliens created this familiar, storybook-like environment to make her feel safe and at ease. While the animals in Disclosure Day are somewhat less cartoonish than the squirrel seen in Taken, the underlying concept is the same, which is extraterrestrials presenting themselves in forms that children would find comforting rather than frightening. It's another subtle example of how the film echoes ideas that have appeared throughout Spielberg's science fiction storytelling. The eyes are very important in Disclosure Day. As vague as it sounds, I think eyes are arguably the most important visual motif in Disclosure Day. If you remember, the film's marketing had given us a hint at their significance long before its release, with one of the posters even featuring a distinctive image of an eye appearing within a flying saucer. Throughout the story, eyes are repeatedly used to symbolize identity, perception, and connection. When Noah uses the alien diving device to enter Jane's mind, the change is revealed through her eyes as her normally blue irises suddenly turn brown, as it matches Noah's eyes and is basically proof that another consciousness has taken control of her. In fact, at one point, we see a butterfly's image reflected in Margaret's eye, which creates a subtle but very meaningful visual moment. Even during the film's first close encounter with an alien, Spielberg chooses to focus on its eye in order to draw our attention to a symbol that echoes throughout the entire film. The film is really all about perception, and more specifically, it is about who controls what we really see. Wardex spends the entire film trying to hide and muddle the truth, while Daniel, Margaret, Hugo, and the rest of their team want the world to know all there is to understand about aliens. As our eyes have been shielded for a long time, Daniel wants all of us to see clearly for the first time. Throughout the film, Margaret and Jane worry whether revealing the truth is truly what's best for humanity. It is definitely a tough call, but ultimately people do deserve to know about what is really happening. The crew's responsibility was to come clean to the world, and what people do with that information is not on them. Even if there are plenty of people who believe that aliens have visited Earth, nobody would really buy it without seeing the evidence firsthand. Spielberg wrote the whole film on his iPad. So in an interview, the iconic filmmaker claimed that he typed out a 52-page long story for Disclosure Day in the Notes app of his iPad during the summer of 2023. He said he had later printed it out, read it, and then went back to the iPad to keep revisiting the draft. He also joked that his handwriting has gotten so bad with age that he could no longer read his world reliably, even though he used to write everything longhand when he was younger. After he finished that draft, Spielberg brought in David Koepp, his longtime collaborator, to turn it into a full screenplay. The director has said the story grew out of his long-standing interest in UFOs, which he said was rekindled by the 2023 congressional UAP hearings and other recent developments. In other words, the iPad Notes app was basically his modern-day notebook for building the film's foundation. The film's corporate military organization was inspired by a real government term. So Wardex was inspired by a real government term. David Koepp said he found the phrase "waived reporting" while digging through congressional UAP hearing transcripts, and he turned it into the first part of Wardex, which apparently stands for Waived Reporting, Development, and Extraction. In other words, the name is built from bureaucratic language that already sounds a little secretive and technical, which is perfect for a mysterious agency in a Spielberg conspiracy thriller. The phrase also fits the movie's bigger theme about a system where information is controlled, filtered, and hidden behind layers of official-sounding procedure. Reviews and coverage of the film describe Wardex as the non-government agency that is at the center of all the cover-ups, and the acronym makes it sound like something that could plausibly exist inside a classified bureaucracy. What makes it especially clever is that the title is doing two jobs at once. On the surface, it sounds like a harsh industrial operations unit. Underneath, it contains a real bit of UAP-era government vocabulary that Koepp says came directly from his research. Spielberg wanted the archival alien footage in the film to match the real-life UFO lore. So Disclosure Day was supposed to feel like a confirmation of the UFO lore, not a reinvention of it, which is why the alien footage was intentionally designed to match real UFO lore. David Koepp said they were looking for a unified theory of the unidentified anomalous phenomenon lore, and consciously tried to include as much of the mythology as possible, rather than debunking it or cherry-picking only the parts that fit neatly. That is the reason why the film mines 70 years worth of UFO mythology, including Roswell and even the Jackie Gleason Nixon legend. It is also the reason why the alien design matters so much. Spielberg said he wanted the movie to feel believable and avoid the uncanny valley, which helps explain why the creatures are kept close to the familiar big head, big eye UFO image audiences already recognize. In a story about a secret agency hiding proof of alien contact, that familiar look makes the reveal look less like brand new sci-fi and more like a definitive answer to stories people have been telling for decades. However, the bigger thematic reason is if Wardex has been suppressing the truth, then the film's aliens should resemble the beings already embedded in public memory, instead of a totally different movie monster. That makes the footage feel like recovered evidence inside a long-running cultural investigation. The train collision sequence in the film is sort of a full circle moment for Spielberg. Spielberg has talked for years about how his filmmaking started with an almost childish need to watch trains crash. After seeing The Greatest Show on Earth, he apparently begged for a toy train set, then kept smashing the cars together until his father threatened to take the trains away. That is when young Spielberg grabbed his father's 8mm camera and filmed the crashes instead, so he could replay them over and over. That story is the core of The Fabelmans. The film turns that memory into a scene where a boy discovers that the camera can preserve a moment he is obsessed with, and Spielberg has described the movie as a semi-autobiographical look at his childhood and the origins of his love of movies. In other words, the train crash is not just a gag or a random detail. The heart-pounding collision scene in Disclosure Day really feels like a full-circle callback to the very first image that made him want to become a filmmaker. I absolutely love how he took the thrill of those childhood train crashes and stretched it into an adult-scale spectacle, which is exactly the kind of emotional rhyme Spielberg loves. The train collision sequence expanded on what Spielberg wanted to do in Duel 1971. So in Disclosure Day, Spielberg ended up fulfilling a long-delayed payoff of an idea that he wanted to put on screen since his first studio feature film, Duel. In this 1971 film, the truck does shove Dennis Weaver's car toward an oncoming freight train, but the train passes before there is an actual impact. Spielberg later said that with Disclosure Day, he finally got to do what he had originally wanted to do with that sequence. That matters because Duel was first made as a 74-minute TV movie, and Universal later expanded it to 90 minutes for theatrical release by having Spielberg shoot extra material, including a railroad crossing scene. So the train sequence in Disclosure Day feels like Spielberg returning to an idea he had parked for decades and finishing it on a bigger, more controlled scale. In fact, the production bought and modified an actual 50,000-pound 50-foot boxcar from a train museum in Kentucky, specifically for the sequence to achieve the intensity of that sequence. And that is exactly why that particular scene is one of the most talked about parts of the film. There is a sly Indiana Jones Easter egg you might have missed. I don't know if you have noticed, but the motel Daniel and Jane hid out in was called Indiana. It is basically a double joke, as Inn makes it feel like a roadside motel, while the addition of Deanna sounds like, well, Indiana, thus turning the location name into a cheeky nod to Spielberg's Indiana Jones legacy, as a sly, funny reference to the franchise. We all know just how deeply Spielberg is associated with Indiana Jones. He directed the first 4 films in the series, and that helped define the character's cinematic identity. So this cool reference is yet another tiny full-circle moment. The farmhouse in Disclosure Day was designed to crash. So remember the remote farmhouse that Daniel and Jane took refuge in until Noah Scanlon telepathically possessed Jane and dug the location out of her while also trying to control her into killing Daniel? Well, according to behind-the-scenes coverage, the farmhouse was not a random location at all, as it was a purpose-built set. The crew reportedly spent about a month constructing it and designed it specifically to survive a car smashing through it more than once, which let them repeat the stunt for multiple takes. That usually means the walls, framing, and breakaway sections have to be carefully engineered so the crash looks chaotic on camera, but the whole thing can still be reset. Plus, the set also has to be safe enough for the crew and stunt team to work around, and it also gives the director much more control over the timing, angles, and debris. Emily Blunt worked overtime on her language training for the film. So Emily Blunt's prep for the film was more intense than a normal accent job, as her role required her to speak in both Korean and Russian fluently. So she spent months working with dialect coaches for each language. In fact, she also had them record lines in different emotional states, be it angry, scared, or reassuring. So she could not just study the words, but also the feeling behind them. Blunt apparently listened to that material constantly for months. However, the alien language that we hear in the film itself was built from her own voice rather than computer-generated effects. Blunt said Spielberg offered to use AI to make it a bit easier for her, but she chose to do it manually by experimenting with clicks, humming, breathing, and Morse code-like rhythms in a bathroom and then in a sound booth. She described the process as throwing the kitchen sink at it as the final sound was assembled by layering those recordings together. What makes that interesting is that the foreign language dialogue and the alien vocalizations serve entirely different purposes in Disclosure Day. The Korean and Russian were there to emphasize on Margaret's sudden abilities, while the invented extraterrestrial sounds are meant to feel mathematical, strange, and just uncanny enough without becoming too frightening. It took Josh O'Connor 1 hour to finish reading the whole script. According to Josh O'Connor, he was sold on Disclosure Day almost immediately after reading it, and apparently he fell in love with the script after Spielberg gave him the fuller draft. He also described Daniel as an unglamorous hero, and more importantly, while reading the script, the actor simply could not put it down. He in fact finished the whole thing in an hour, which was unusually fast for him because he is dyslexic. O'Connor's dyslexia is a real part of how he has talked about reading scripts in the past, because his dyslexia changed the way he approached reading growing up, and it also shaped how he processes text. So the interesting part is not just that he liked the script, but that it clearly grabbed him in a way that cut through the extra effort reading can take for him. That usually points to a screenplay with strong momentum, and we really expect nothing more from Spielberg. Hugo Wakefield's character was inspired by a late Harvard psychiatrist. So Coleman Domingo, who played Hugo in the film, explained that he simply leaned into the part and that one of the real inspirations behind shaping Hugo was John E. Mack, the late Harvard psychiatrist whose work on alien abduction claims made him one of the most famous and controversial voices in UFO research. Mack was not a fringe character in the ordinary sense, as he was a Pulitzer Prize-winning psychiatrist and teacher whose interests later turned toward people reporting contact with alien beings, making it one of the more controversial directions of his career. That helps explain why Hugo Wakefield feels different from a typical believer-type character. Mack's legacy is tied to the idea that people describing encounters should be listened to seriously, even if the claims themselves remain disputed. In his own interviews, Mack framed alien abduction experiences as an authentic mystery and described it on accounts of psychological and experiential terms rather than as simple fantasy. So the Mack inspiration likely gives Hugo his mix of conviction, empathy, and intellectual seriousness rather than just conspiracy theory energy. That truly fits a character who seems less like a wild-eyed UFO buff and more like someone trying to bridge belief, trauma, and public truth. But that's not all. One of Hugo's most important character traits actually came from Coleman Domingo's husband, as the actor had decided that Hugo would often sit with his palms open, simply because he had noticed his husband Raul naturally doing that, as he felt it communicated openness to whatever life brings. The Kansas City broadcast room was actually built inside New Jersey Institute of Technology. So the KCXE newsroom is a great example of Spielberg's obsession with practical filmmaking and realism. Rather than building a conventional TV studio set on a soundstage, the production took over a building at the New Jersey Institute of Technology and transformed it into the fictional Kansas City station, as the filmmaker wanted the environment to feel like a real working newsroom rather than a movie version of one. What made the set unusual was how functional it was, as the cameras were connected to live feeds, allowing footage to be transmitted directly into the control room. In fact, many of the monitors, broadcast systems, and production consoles actually worked, thus enabling actors to react to real images instead of green screens or placeholder graphics. This meant Spielberg could shoot scenes much more organically, with the actors responding to events as they happened on set. Even the large glass walls seen in the film were designed to make the station feel open and connected to the community, similar to high-profile morning shows where viewers can see the newsroom from outside. The practical approach also gave Spielberg tremendous flexibility, especially because the set helped him place the camera almost anywhere and capture action from unexpected angles. This helped create the kinetic, chaotic feeling of the film's climactic broadcast sequence, where information spreads from a local station to the entire world. Not just that, the realism extended beyond KCXE itself. For the scenes showing the story spreading nationally, Spielberg filmed inside the real NBC News headquarters at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and even included actual newsroom employees in some shots. In fact, many of the broadcast professionals who watched the film noticed that much of the newsroom technology looked surprisingly authentic. Isn't that cool? The alien diving device is not an ordinary prop. Well, one of the film's most intriguing props is the mysterious alien diving device carried by Daniel. As it turns out, the production team experimented with several materials while developing its look, including meteorite fragments, before they ultimately settled on Damascus steel, which is a legendary high-carbon metal historically used to forge durable swords and blades. This choice gave the object a distinctive texture and an ancient, almost mythical quality that just felt appropriate for a piece of alien technology. Plus, the device's unusual shape was also the result of an unexpected design change. It was originally conceived as a hexagon, but during the fabrication process, a Brooklyn-based metalworker suggested adding an extra side to it, which transformed the prop into a heptagon, thus making it feel just a little more unfamiliar and unworldly because, you know, it's just one of those shapes you don't see a lot. Lastly, if you were good at attention to detail, you might have noticed a subtle clue hidden in the design. So the symbols engraved on Daniel's device are the same markings that later appeared in the film's crop circle formation right outside the farmhouse. It is definitely a small detail, but it beautifully connects every larger unfolding mystery with the alien artifact in Disclosure Day. Well, that brings us to the very end of this video. Did I happen to miss out any Easter egg from the latest Spielberg film? Let us know about your thoughts and theories in the comment box below.